The government this week decided to pull its Levelling Up and Regeneration Bill, which was due to be voted on next Monday. This is because almost 50 backbench rebels signed up to amendments designed to abolish housing targets and scrap what's known as the presumption in favour of sustainable development, two key elements of the planning framework that actually get houses built. Albeit that currently very few houses are being built in the UK, hundreds of thousands fewer than similar competitors like France. The proposed amendments are estimated to suppress house building by up to 40%, on top of course, a crash in the housing sector brought about by recession. This analysis led the author of the 2019 Conservative Manifesto, Robert Colville, to rename one of these Tory amendments, calling it the Destroy the Planning System and Make the Recession Worse Amendment 2022. Colville, who was on this programme on Monday, presented evidence to show house building may fall dramatically just at a time when the economy is falling off a cliff. Colville said this amendment would make the recession worse, necessitate more austerity, thousands of job losses, and get this, a £17 billion hit to the economy. Well, with that in mind, I'm delighted to be joined by one of the rebels supporting these amendments. Bob Seeley is the Member of Parliament for the Isle of Wight. And Bob, It's a pretty strong challenge that we heard there from Robert Colville. We spoke to him on Monday. He says this will crash house building in the United Kingdom. Do you agree?
No, I don't. I don't think he's... I think his facts are just plucked out from the air. I think it's absolute nonsense. What's causing a slowdown in house building is not council saying no, because 80% of development gets approved. It's not pesky NIMBYs blocking everything, because very often they don't have the power. What's holding up development in this country is that there are about 1 million planning permissions which are land banked by the big property companies, effectively land cartels, in order to keep the price of land high, the prices of houses high, their share price high, and their bonuses high. So if you want to actually get building in this country, handing out another 100,000 permissions to Persimmons is not the way to do it. It's just nonsense. And the problem is, there are people engaged in this argument who simply don't understand how the system works and what you need to do if you want to change and improve the system. All our amendments, apart from the housing targets, scrapping the housing targets top down, are actually amendments about how we can free up the system to build more on brownfield and to disincentivise greenfield and to incentivise brownfield, because we want to see that development boom. We just want to see it on brownfield sites in existing communities where there are already shops, already services, and where young families don't necessarily need cars. So we are being typecast in a way which is sloppy, ignorant and ill-informed.
What do you say to those who say that there simply isn't enough brownfield land in the United Kingdom? And if we are going to build the houses that we need, the target that the government said, the target that was in the 2019 manifesto of 300,000 a year, that will involve some land that hasn't previously been built on?
That's absolutely true. We don't have enough greenfield land everywhere. No question about it. But we have some 400,000 plus planning permissions on brownfield sites. You go up any high street in Britain, you go and walk in Newport in my patch, in Ryde, and above the shops you will see empty property after empty property. We have some of the lowest density communities in Europe, and indeed in the world. So the idea that the answer to our problems is this very adversarial system of top-down targets, which then get pushed back from local government and developers demanding more and more greenfield, which is then opposed by local folks. And, the locals don't want the housing, and the local young people can't afford the housing. So somehow the idea that all these boxy sold us out of town, car-dependent, low density, bad for the environment, greenfield housing estates are for young people, it's a myth. It's for the birds. So we have to get real about planning.
So you're making a compelling argument there about densification within cities. It's an argument that I'm surprised more Conservatives haven't been making, because ultimately one of your colleagues, Simon Clarke, the former Levelling Up secretary, has been saying one of the reasons why Conservatives are losing in London but winning in places like Middlesbrough that he represents is because if you're a nurse or a teacher, you can buy a house in a place like Middlesbrough, but you can't in London. Yep. Again, low density, not enough building. Why don't you pursue amendments that would liberalise planning and building within those cities?
I think some of the sort of building up in certain areas, I'm up for that. I'm all for supporting these sort of local referendum. If you can go up a story or two in a local community, I'm up for that. Higher densification is part of the answer. Look, where's the densest property in Europe? Kensington. You know, so we associate high density with low quality. We associate low density with high quality. Actually, low density, you're car dependent. Everywhere you go is car. There's no bus. You can't walk anywhere. You drive to the shop. You drive home. You know, you get a bit of beast doing it. You don't do any exercise. You know, the idea that this is the way ahead. And the problem is that we've allowed the development industry and the greenfield site sort of process to dominate house building in this country, and it's got to change. And there are so many brownfield sites. We want. Look, I
suppose the big criticism here is that you're saying all of this now in terms of we need more density in cities. It's a compelling argument and one that instinctively Conservatives should support. But the amendments that you do say how you will stop development in greenfield sites.
Have you read the amendments?
I have read several of the amendments, particularly the ones about the presumption for sustainable development, one of the key things that builds houses, and the stopping of targets within local areas, which, of course, is what gets that planning permission delivered in the first place.
Tom, OK, great point. We are against top-down targets because the evidence shows that when you embrace communities and communities put in neighbourhood plans, they actually want more housing because they understand the need. And the so-called NIMBYs think, oh, I'll make sure there's a house for my kid or for my grandkid, or we'll get more affordable housing in the mix. And we don't mind that plot being used because it's never really been used, but we like that bit of green field. So
is there that much evidence to suggest that that's the case?
There's not a huge amount of evidence, no, but the evidence that's out there suggests that communities that engage with neighbourhood plans actually have more successful planning outcomes. So that is there. There is some evidence to suggest that that's the case. Look, if you look at our amendments... Let me just make the point. If you look at our amendments, a lot of them is saying, can you please review the economics of brownfield versus greenfield? One of the problems that we've had is that, you know, greenfield, VAT free, it's really easy, really cheap. So the developers have become reliant on greenfield. Do they then build? No. What do? They land bank. Why? To keep the value of the land high, to keep the value of the housing high, and they drip it out over 10, 15 years, and sometimes they take more than a decade to get started on a project. So we've got two amendments. One is use it or lose it. You either build out by a given time or you lose that planning permission. That's going to cost you a lot of money. Second amendment, you pay council tax on a plot regardless of whether you finished it. So if I am Mr. Developer and I get a site now, and I agree to pay council tax in 4 years' time for a 200-house plot, if I haven't built, I'm going to be stung a lot for council tax in 4 years' time. That is an incentive to get building. So actually, when people say, oh, you're just a bunch of NIMBYs saying no, it's just absolute rubbish, and they've not a clue what they're talking about. What we are trying to do is get the building industry being responsible, and we want a system which is community-based, which is environment-based and which is regeneration-based. And what's the best way to do that? You get developers building on brownfield sites in existing communities where you don't need a car to live, where you're close to shops, where you're close to schools and GP surgeries. That's what we want to see. But yes, we also want to protect greenfield sites because on a place like the Isle of Wight, look, our landscape is part of our tourism economy. And if it is just bulldozed in the next 20 to 25 years, I lose 40% of my economy, and effectively the island will just become a poorer suburb of Portsmouth and Southampton. That's not a future for my folks.
I think a lot of people might see that as a bit of a hyperbolic argument there in terms of what is actually being proposed.